Well, thank you everyone for joining today for this webinar. I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself. So my name is Ryan Cortree. I'm the membership manager here at Lowcountry Local First, and I'm also the manager of our commercial space advising program. In partnership with the town of Mount Pleasant, we're presenting this good business workshop, Commercial Space 101. When you start a business, you are an expert in your product or service, but not necessarily in real estate. Power imbalances can be created when small business owners don't have the information they need to make informed, strategic real estate decisions. This crash course workshop will engage real estate experts to give need-to-know information for finding, evaluating, leasing, or buying a commercial space. So the format of this panel is going to be a 60-minute panel with a Q&A. So if you have any questions along the way, you can put those in the chat, and we'll make sure when we get to the Q&A that we answer your questions. And if time does not allot, we will follow up to make sure that we have answers to your questions. I would like to start today with introducing our three wonderful panelists and experts in their respective fields. We have Luiz Yamashita, the managing partner of Dune Commercial Properties, Chris Altman, the vice president of SMHa, Matt Brady, the economic development director of the town of Mount Pleasant. And to kind of get started here, I feel like the best spot to start would be, could each of you introduce yourself and tell us how you work with local businesses on commercial space projects with a few examples of businesses you've worked with. I think the flow of this will go with Luis, Chris, and Matt. So if you would like to start, Luis.
Hi, everybody. Luiz Yamashita. As Ryan said, I'm with Dunes Commercial Properties. We do brokerage services for businesses, investors, any type of person interested in a commercial real estate property, buying, leasing, selling. That's pretty much what we do. We don't sell houses, that's typically something that's done by the residential agents, but we work very similarly to what they do in terms of, we meet with clients on the properties, we explain the market, and like I mentioned, it's primarily commercial. So anything commercial-wise, feel free to send questions. Hopefully we can also answer future questions if you have to. Don't feel bad. Feel free to email me, ask Ryan for my contact, and I will follow up on those as well. As a quick example, before I even got my license, I never knew a commercial agent existed, and I tried to help my wife negotiate a lease in Mount Pleasant, and that went very badly. So I'll tell you more about it, throughout this seminar.
Well, my name is Chris Altman. I'm with SMHa Architects. We're over in Mount Pleasant. Our office does commercial. Like Luiz, we don't do residential. We do about everything except for multifamily, and have quite a bit of experience doing retail and office space and restaurants as well. Done projects like renovation of Bowman Place here in Mount Pleasant, to multiple buildings at Freshfields at Kiowa, the Live Oak development on Johns Island, and kind of everything in between. Like I said, we've kind of seen a lot of different types of commercial projects over the years, and we really help clients from the earliest stage of doing due diligence all the way through construction and into the time you walk into your new space.
And I am Matt Brady. I am with the town of Mount Pleasant. That's the municipality that you have to go through for all your approvals and permittings and yeses and nos. And my job is sort of twofold: to help small businesses and also to do some business recruiting and retention for our identified clusters. And we help small businesses all the time kind of navigate our processes and going through that. Right now with a bookstore that got a little bit ahead of the skis and just kind of getting through our internal administrative processes, which, as these other two guys could probably tell you, are notoriously vigorous. And so sometimes you just need a hand to get through all of that stuff.
Excellent. Thank you guys for introducing yourselves. So let's kind of hop in here. We'll keep the same kind of direction here. So we'll start with Luis. Luis, let's kind of like just start with the basics. What are the first steps and cost of working with a real estate broker? And if you decide not to use a real estate broker, where can I start my search for a commercial space property on my own?
Okay. Well, to my best advice will be to, ask some other friends and family members, if they have used anybody in the past. Typically, that will give you a couple, contacts. That person will help you kind of, understand the market, what you're looking for. At some point, there'll be some sort of a engagement agreement where you are hiring that person to help you find your space, or buy your property. Um, if you want to just kind of look into what's available out there, similar to Zillow, there's a company called LoopNet, LOOP net, NET. They list, a lot of the properties that we can see as well. And it will show you the price, it will show you the size, it will have some pictures of what the space looks like. And if you want to just kind of initiate that, initial search on LoopNet, that'll be the best spot. You can even create some criteria where the system is gonna notify you if something becomes available at a specific location within a certain price. So that'll be the basics of it.
Yeah. I completely agree. I use LoopNet when I'm fielding the people going through commercial space advising. I'm like, it's a great place to at least get an idea of your budget and square footage and the things that you're looking for, and kind of a great place to get an idea of what's out there, then talk maybe to a real estate broker or somebody in real estate development to be able to get a better understanding of, does my budget kind of meet what I'm looking for? Is what I'm looking for a feasible property?
Right.
So yeah, I completely agree. Chris, so what factors are important to consider when finding the right space when it comes to design and build out? And are there any special considerations for different business types, food and bev, retail, office, things like that?
Yeah, there are. It's probably best to try to respond to things I've seen come up on projects that have surprised tenants or prospective tenants. The easiest, I think, is office space. That's a pretty easy one. I mean, really, there's not a whole lot of tripwires there, if you will. One thing that I would consider advising an owner, if you're going into a building that has tenants on either side of you, if you're a multi-tenant building, who are your neighbors? We've seen a couple of times where people go in and their next door neighbor may be an exercise tenant that produces a lot of music, and all of a sudden they find themselves being very disrupted by that. There could be costs associated with trying to insulate that sound in their space that they may not have been anticipating. So things like that for office and retail, I think, are the big ones. Restaurants, though, are a different animal. There's a lot of opportunity there for some surprises, if you will, especially if you're going into a space where it was never a restaurant to begin with, to say it was originally an office or retail space. If you're doing any kind of cooking, you're going to be adding a hood to that space. There's a cost associated with that, but then that triggers mechanical requirements. The units have to be sized to provide makeup air for what that exhaust is pulling. A lot of times we see those units that are there existing for like an office or retail use are not sized appropriately for that need. So they may be an upsize requirement that it has a cost. Electrical service to the space may have to increase because of the equipment that's being used in a restaurant that's not necessarily needed for an office or retail. Grease traps are another one that catch people. Those are required when you have a food production. And depending on the municipality you're working with, the requirements of that vary. We've been able to do projects where we've had under counter ones, very small ones, but we literally had to submit the menu to the municipality for proof that they weren't producing so much that couldn't handle it. More than likely, you're seeing one that's outside in the ground that has to be serviced. So there's usually a cost that most clients are not necessarily anticipating or thinking about. And then another one for all three would be generally you have to provide a hazardous material report. And that surprises people. Even if you're doing a project in a building that's, say, built in 2010, you're still having to provide that report. We all know that it doesn't have asbestos and lead paint in it, but it's required. But if you're looking at an older building, that's definitely something you need to have a conversation with your landlord about providing. Yeah, I mean, those are some of the big ones. I guess all that to say, getting in early and doing a good due diligence is really key to sort of unpacking some of those potential unknowns when you're looking at a space.
And Matt, so we all know zoning, not to dive too deep into that world, but we know zoning is a big piece of figuring out if you're able to have this commercial space property here with the zoning, and if you need a commercial space variance use kind of thing. But a question I have for you is, who should business owners for the town of Mount Pleasant contact to learn more about zoning regulations and ensure a property is suitable for commercial use in the town?
So, at the end of the day, you can always contact me directly, and I kind of can serve as an ombudsman to help you through these kind of questions. But our planning and zoning department is set up to do that. And you want to do XYZ business, you tell them exactly what you want to do, and you just reach out to either you can find someone on staff or just use the general planning email and get a zoning verification letter. It's actually pretty simple. Once you tell them what you want to do, there's a table, does it meet it or not? And then if you really want to be in a space, there's possibility to change the zoning. A couple months ago, we amended a plan development agreement to sort of fold in a use that should have made sense, but didn't maybe 25 years ago. So planning is the best place to start with us. But I would also say, kind of to the due diligence question, the more time you can spend, if you could take a half hour or something like that and talk to a planner or to me about what your project is, or even better, maybe if you could talk to someone like a building official who will ultimately poke holes in everything you try to do. That's probably the best person to kind of to get through to make sure, hey, this is a doable project. And we may get to this later, but I truly can't stress enough to any new prospective person, do hire a broker in these situations, and do consult design professionals if you're going to do any kind of work at all, because they're the ones who have been there, done that. And if you're a rookie doing this, I'm in the middle of one right now. Stuff that probably could have taken an hour is taking going on 2 months, just because it's a bunch of surprises. Someone who didn't know how to go through the process because it's not intuitive, right? And it's just better to ask as many questions as possible on the front end of the municipality.
Right, because ultimately it saves you the headache that could be potentially down the road if you don't do that first.
Well, yeah, you've got an agreement with a landlord, and you tell them it's going to take you like a month to get your upfits done because they're simple, and that's when your first lease payments started, and you're a coffee shop and you haven't poured the first cup yet, right? And so, it's better to kind of do all that stuff on the front end.
Absolutely, absolutely. Bounce back to you, Luis. So, can you talk about some tips business owners should keep in mind when considering location and size of the space?
Yes, I think what Chris and Matt just mentioned are very key elements. First, the zoning would be the main element. Maybe the space is perfect, the size is ideal, but if the zoning is not right, you can only do office and you're trying to open a restaurant, you will never be able to get that business started. Downmount Pleasant, in this case, they will not issue your certificate of occupancy or business license. And the space as well, when you look at it, sometimes it may be perfect in terms of it's ready to move in, but a lot of times you have to do renovations. Office usually don't have to do a lot, but retail and restaurants, you will have to do a lot of work. So understanding the space is very key. Right now I'm working with a client that wants to occupy this restaurant space, and nobody has the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing drawings for that space, and he has to make some small modifications, very small, but he doesn't want to commit to the lease agreement until he sees that, to understand the depth of how much work he has to do. So I had to go to the town Mount Pleasant and do what we call like a Freedom of Information Act request, so we can see if they have the drawings, which they should, and they can share that with us, so we can pass that along to the client. So now, very important is to understand, your budget initially, how you're going to get the business started. A lot of landlords, if you're a first time, business renting the space, they would like to see your financials, make sure that you are strongly financed, to get that business going. And also, if you have a business plan. The business plan can be just a few pages explaining what you're trying to do, how you plan to accomplish that goal, how you're going to get clients, and then recruit your staff, things like that. Once they see that you are financially capable, to pay for the rent and be there for a few years, they will feel more comfortable that you're headed in the right direction. You got to look at the landlord as some sort of a partner as well, because they got to trust you and with their space. So you need to make sure they are very comfortable with what you're trying to do.
Right. No, absolutely. Because I think a lot of times as an entrepreneur, and especially a successful one where you get to the point of opening up your first brick and mortar location, the excitement of getting that location might make you think, let me not do all these steps before I sign the lease. But in reality, you should do all of these things that you mentioned before you even put pen to paper.
Exactly. And I was going to just mention, hiring a broker does help because we have had, to go from the beginning to the end in many, different municipalities with different, other vendors. So we can help kind of guide you in that, the right direction. And sometimes Chris, you may not know that you have to call him. So we might be able to say, hey, call Chris about this, or call Matt Brady first and make sure that the zoning won't be an issue for what you're trying to do. And the broker, you should know those things. Whoever you're working with, they'll guide you to the proper direction.
Right. And as an entrepreneur, you don't know what you don't know
Exactly.
until you talk to these people. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
So next question for Chris. So it's a one-part question, but I did want to mention something that I've learned over my time being in this program. So the question is, tell us about working with an architect versus a contractor and what kind of costs business owners can expect to incur. One thing I've learned is, and maybe you can shed some light on this, that it is a good idea to get multiple quotes when you reach out to these architects and contractors to kind of make sure like the price of the job or whatever is needing to be done seems to be pretty consistent. But just in general, when you reach out to an architect or contractor, what kind of expenses do business owners typically run into?
So for architects, I mean, and they vary, as you kind of alluded to. Typically, what you'll see, depending on the services you need, we kind of go through due diligence. We usually get involved very early in a project, like what Matt was saying. Sometimes we will help clients who are not comfortable going to municipalities and talking with them about zoning and stuff like that. So we will be involved in that, doing site investigation of the building, as I mentioned earlier, to kind of unravel what we're working with. We typically do an hourly fee with a cap for like schematic design. So if you want to flesh out multiple design ideas for what your space may look like, so that we're only charging you for the time that we're spending on it, and there's not an open-ended sort of end on that. And then we provide usually a flat fee to do everything from construction documents all the way through construction administration. Those fees vary from firm to firm, but I mean, to give you a range, it's probably somewhere between 5 and 10% for a typical upfit. And that number moves when you look at it as a percentage, because my comparison is like buying a car, whether you're buying a Nissan Sentra or a Ferrari, they all have four wheels, at least two doors, a hood, and windshield. There's a certain amount of work that has to be done no matter the size of the project. And so the cost to do that work is the cost. And when you look at it compared to the construction cost, smaller projects percentage is a little higher. Contractors, I think, are by and large similar. A lot of them will provide pre-construction services either for free or for a nominal fee, and then typically offer a flat rate fee for their services during construction. I will say, as far as working with the both, I think the best situation is when we're both on board early. And I say that because particularly for contractors, pricing is paramount. I mean, I don't envy these guys in today's market right now trying to keep tabs on costs, especially as we look into the next several months here. It's almost like day trading for these guys. And so keeping tabs on that is huge, so that we make sure we're not things aren't getting sideways for the owner. And also for lead times, trying to identify those. We, particularly during the pandemic, we were seeing some crazy lead times. One that sticks out was 14 weeks to get a transformer. It's not crazy like that now, but if you're a owner that's got some particular, unique devices or things that are going into your space that are not normal. Helping to identify it, there's a long lead time is very important so that we understand how that might impact your schedule. You may have to order those things early in order to meet your schedule.
Absolutely. Matt, so to kind of ping over to you, can you tell us a little bit about the economic development efforts in the town, the business climate, and any other important background information that might be worthwhile?
Yeah, so when we think about economic development in Mount Pleasant, from like the business recruitment side, we typically are thinking about tech and life science and jobs that are in sort of the white collar innovation space. And there's kind of two reasons for that. One, it fits basically the people that may be able to work those jobs may be able to live in Mount Pleasant. And that's just sort of a reality, a harsh reality that we're dealing with right now with a median sales price over $1 million. And so that's sort of fits the community profile. We aren't going to be having a lot of new industrial come online, although we do have some spec industrial going in right now near the Mount Pleasant airport, but it's primarily looking at tech, life science, entrepreneurship. And we work really closely with the county and CRDA on the recruitment efforts. And we've also sort of started leaning into like the homegrown stuff, the entrepreneurship. We were investors in an organization called the Harbor Entrepreneur Center, which is now in a beautiful building in Mount Pleasant. It's at 11 E Wall Street is the address. And there are over 100 companies in there right now. And the idea behind our investment is that one day baby bird's going to leave the nest, right? And so I'm able to make relationships with those companies that are primarily in that space that we're looking for, and hopefully find them a space in town. But small business support is also a component of what we're trying to do. Because small businesses are like really the backbone of a community. Is kind of what makes a community what it is. And so I mentioned the bookstore I'm working with right now. This person already has like 15,000 followers on Instagram. She's popular before she even gets open. It will be, if you're familiar with the term third places, it'll be a third place. So your first place is your home, second place is work, and then the third place are the places you hang out. So it's your watering hole or your church or your park or your library, places that really kind of make up the fabric of your community. So we're going to try do as much as we can to support small businesses, because that's sort of what people think of when they think of what's cool in Mount Pleasant, right? So one of the things we're going to be doing is, once our fiscal year rolls around, is we're going to be a partner with Lowcountry Local First and what they're calling their ambassador program. And that allows me to almost like extend what kind of staff we have, because they'll support small businesses through a whole variety of programs. So it's kind of two buckets: business recruitment and then supporting small businesses. And one of the things that is hurting us right now is that if you were to geofence Mount Pleasant and try to figure out how much office vacancy you have, it's like 6%. So it might as well be zero, right? So if we're going to recruit these really nice businesses that are someday going to want like a Class A trophy space, we're going to need somebody to build that Class A trophy office space for us. So part of what, and I've only been at Mount Pleasant for 2 years and just presented sort of like my second strategic plan. And part of it is going to be trying to get people to build speculative office space. Now, the two guys that are my fellow panelists here know the office is a really precarious moving target right now, but I tend to believe that we could probably absorb some more office in this market. So that'll be something that we'll be working on moving forward. And I also think that the next frontier of Mount Pleasant in terms of kind of economic development and the built environment is as you drive around town, particularly like Coleman Boulevard and Johnny Dodds Road, you see a lot of aging strip centers that cash flow great, but they aren't really at the best in highest use right now. So some of these are starting to transfer hands. And so I imagine over the next decade, a lot of these will be people will try to transform these into mixed use development, especially as retail changes, as we continue to have a demand for housing and people lean more towards the experiential stuff out there in the built environment as opposed to just pure retail.
Right. And sometimes you see these office spaces, which I know someone I'm currently chatting with that they found a property that has an upstairs and downstairs, but shared spaces where you can put retail into a shared space and be able to split the rent. And but to Chris's point of earlier, where it's like you got to be mindful, like how loud is it going to be, what's the business going to be above me, things like that. But I think there's great opportunity for local businesses in Mount Pleasant, like you said, like when you're on Coleman or you're out at Shim Creek, or like there's a lot of local businesses that run up and down that strip, that it would be great to find spaces that give local businesses the opportunity to move them in there at an affordable rate, but also giving that like Mount Pleasant vibe, if you will, of the local feeling, because we all love like local businesses create this like cultural identity, but also this identity of like a very locally forward community that each little pocket of Charleston seems to have.
Yeah, absolutely. And each one of these small businesses represents someone's whole life, right? Like it's not just the place you go and hang out as a consumer. Someone is behind there, and like that's their entire it's their hopes and dreams that are on the line there. And like if someone's doing a good job at running that business, it should shine through, right? It'll make you want to return as a customer or a client or whatever. And that's the kind of thing we want to promote. And we kind of kicked off this Mount Pleasant Made campaign. A plug if anybody wants to go to mountpleasantmade.com. It's our website, and it's really an economic development website, but we can also use sort of the branding marks and all that sort of stuff as a way to promote local businesses, stuff that's uniquely local. The made part of it is used very loosely, right? Like, so if you're a dentist and your sole practice is in Mount Pleasant, you can be Mount Pleasant Made as well. So that's what we're working on, and we're getting traction. Political leadership starting to kind of get what I'm trying to do. I'm a one-man show, and it's taking a little while to kind of get them to catch on, but I think that's where we're headed.
Yeah, and you're advocating nonetheless for something that's really important. So I think that's great for small businesses, especially ones that want to be locally here. Kind of bounce back to you, Luis. So when a space is advertised as, let's say, $20 per square foot at 1,000 square feet, how does that translate into monthly rent? And which is how most businesses would think about budgeting. I know you mentioned finances, so that's a big piece of it, is figuring out, what is my budget actually to afford a space? Because I've come to realize, talking to some entrepreneurs, that in the initial phase you think, I want to be on King Street, I want to be in these high value, high trafficked areas, but I necessarily can't afford to be there. And that's okay, because at the end of the day, your first location could eventually become your main location, and you just might have to figure out like what works for your budget. So when you look at the price per square foot and the square footage, and how that translates into monthly rent, how should they be thinking about that? Like,
Okay. When most leases or most spaces available for lease, I should say, they advertise their price on a price per square foot basis, like the example we gave. So 1,000 square feet at $22 a foot, you multiply that 1,000 times 22, and that will give you your annual rent. So if you want to find out your monthly rent, you just divide that total by 12, which in this case I think will be $1,666. Now, a lot of times you're gonna see different structures of lease, types, meaning that that 22 might be, or that $20 a foot might be just the base rent, and sometimes that's all you pay to the landlord. Sometimes there might be some additional, expenses you're gonna reimburse the landlord for. The most common lease type that we see that includes additional expenses, it will be the triple net lease, where you pay a portion of your of the property's tax, insurance, and maintenance. So in that case, if it is just you in the building, then you pay 100% of that. The landlord is going to make the payment and ask you to reimburse him or her for that amount. If you occupy like, one of four spaces, then you just pay a quarter of that. That's typically, how they go about this. And it's important to look at the details and understand exactly what type of lease offer they have online. A lot of times they don't want advertise because not because they're not trying to be transparent, but the platforms they don't allow you to give you all the information needed. So sometimes the broker has to go in and make some phone calls, or if you call them, you need to ask them, is this all I pay or what else is included? Something to factor in is utilities. A lot of times water might be included, but power may not. Or if you need gas, natural gas, you have to also get that and you'll be paying that on top. Electricity has gone up quite a bit. So, you could be paying $300, $400, $500 depending on the time of the year, just in electricity bills. And very important to also get your own insurance. Even though sometimes the triple net will say, you're reimbursing the landlord for insurance, you are technically reimbursing for the cost of the property, the real estate insurance. But as a business owner, you're going to have your own insurance for your products that you have on the shelf or for the services you provide. So you need to factor that in. Something else that Ryan just mentioned was the financing. A lot of times, some of these spaces, they're going to require a massive amount of work, meaning that, the space is not ready. You're gonna have to build it. You may have to build bathrooms, you may have to build a kitchen, or you may have to build walls to separate the offices. And the landlord may contribute some money into it, and they call that a tenant improvement allowance, or TI or TIA. And sometimes, you may require to get financing. So before you even make an offer to lease a space, you want to understand, what's the credit available for your business, and having a connection with either a local bank or maybe someone that can help you finance that project. It's very key, and that'll be something the landlord will be asking to validate or confirm that's in place before signing a lease.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the entrepreneurs I've worked with, I've heard, once I got into like the lease negotiation phase, that sometimes when you put equity into the space, like if,
Mhm.
they have a janky heating and air system or
Mhm.
something that needs to be upgraded and you're willing to put equity in the space, they're willing to work with you on maybe first month's free rent or
Sure.
kind of help you out in that regard, that if you're putting equity into the space, it can be beneficial in terms of your monthly rent, where you'll see some of that being shaved off because you're putting equity in the space.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the more you can offer to make the landlord feel more comfortable, and in this example, if you're going to be improving the space, the more they're willing to concede to some of the things that might help you. For example, the free month. So if you need to have some work done, it's going to take maybe 2 months to be done, and it's going to cost some money for you out of pocket. Maybe you can ask the landlord to give you 2 months of free rent, so you're not paying rent during that time, and that helps you offset some of that cost. Sometimes it's not going to be 100%, but it helps offset a good portion of it.
Right, and it helps you negotiate on your end to get a better deal, or sometimes even the space has been available for so long that they're willing to work
Mhm.
with you because it's been
Exactly.
vacant.
Exactly.
I
Yes. And
agree.
that tenant improvement allowance may vary a little bit. When I mentioned that first lease that I did before being an agent, they said they had $10 a foot available for tenant improvement. I was like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. It's free money. Like why did I not know about this before? And the space was in a shell condition, which Chris probably knows that, and Matt as well, meaning that there was nothing. There was just the exterior walls.
Mhm.
We had to install HVACs, build the walls, do all the plumbing, all the electrical, bring the power into the building. So that $10 a foot was actually no money, at all. It was just very little compared to what was needed. So, a broker will be able to kind of guide you on things that you might be able to ask, things that you might be able to get, so that way you set your expectations, you can plan that around your budget to make your business work, so you don't come out of the gate, spending all this money, and then you have very little chance of succeeding at that space.
Right, right. So Chris,
Yeah.
getting into like the permitting, but not too heavy. Can you tell
Yeah.
us about the permitting process and your
Ooh.
best advice for navigating permitting in the most efficient way?
Oh, that's the $1 million question. Well, permitting is not getting any shorter. I can promise you that. My best advice for getting through it, honestly, is pretty simple. Just follow the process, right? In the 20 years I've done this, where I've seen it sort of go haywire for clients is when they try to short circuit the process, try to get ahead of it, jump steps kind of thing. That's when I see it actually getting delayed and costing them more time and money than if they were just to do what they're supposed to do. And as Matt said, I think it's incredibly invaluable to get in early, talk with the staff, find out where the pain points could be on the project, what their concerns are, what can we address now so that we don't go down the road, finally get to the first, review process only to find out there's some issue that we could have addressed 2 months ago. Those are sort of the big pieces for me. Not all upfits, of course, are going to deal with things like DRBs and BAR, but if you do have those components, those are absolutely critical to get in front of staff and talk with them about it. And honestly, just trying to do what we're really big on, doing projects of our place. So, doing a project that fits within the zoning, fits within the architecture of what that area is looking for. The more I think you try to swim upstream, the slower the process is going to be, and the more rounds you're going to go before you finally get where you need to be when it comes to that permitting process. So that would be my big advice.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think the scariest thing, like being on the side of when I've had or when I talk to entrepreneurs, is there are so many hoops to jump through, and sometimes there's this battle of which hoop do I need to jump through first,
Right.
and like just the idea of getting burned and being like, did I miss a step? Did I do something wrong?
Right.
And making sure that you kind of are tackling each of these things, which I feel like what we do with our program, we do that in a great way. So we put them through like a kind of a process of each person they need to go through. So we kind of handhold them rather through a process where they face each challenge with, an expert that's going to support them in the background, be able to make sure that they're not in a situation they shouldn't be in, but kind of go through each process in a way that makes sense to make sure that, it doesn't cost them big time to make a poor decision on something they didn't know.
I'd also advise to really be realistic about timeframes. It's not quick these days, especially if you're doing new construction. Stormwater in particular is a big one in certain areas. City of Charleston, that process could take 9 to 14 months, depending on the kind of complexity the project is and the site constraints and issues with the site. So, coming to us and saying, "Hey, I'm signing a lease this month, and I need to be in 2 months." It's just not going to happen. Even if we could work that fast, you're just not going to get through the review process that quickly. So sitting down again with the experts, whether it's with staff at the municipality, with the design professionals, and really mapping out what permitting requirements are going to be for your project and the timeframes that those are going to take, really help you understand early on, what are we looking at when you're trying to deal with that.
Right. Absolutely. Matt, so what projects is the town currently working on, and how is it supporting small business? It's a little two-parter. And are there any specific incentives for local businesses to open in Mount Pleasant?
So, what we're currently working on, I have a couple of, this is not going to be meaningful to you guys probably, but we've got a couple of like sort of code name projects working right now with Commerce and the county, and that would be great if those came to fruition. What we're working to try to do is establish ourselves as a true destination for tech, and life science is a burgeoning sector in South Carolina, and in Charleston there's a lack of wet lab space. And I am trying to convince my elected leadership to build some wet lab space on spec to serve as a soft landing space. Now that's an expensive proposition, but that would absolutely make us stand out among our peers. So that's something we're sort of working on. we have several small businesses coming in right now. I mentioned the bookstore. I work kind of hand in glove with a lot of them. I'm on the chamber board, the Mount Pleasant Chamber Board, and so they get to know a lot of the things that are coming through right now. Um, in the future, like I said, we're going to sign a contract with Lowcountry Local First to do the ambassadors program. And we're also going to look at doing some external retail recruitment for Mount Pleasant. And I think your second question was like, what kind of incentives are available for small businesses?
Yeah.
So right now, our incentives are geared towards basically office jobs. But we are looking at reducing some of the kind of artificial burdens that we place on businesses through our change of use impact fees, which is like, let's say you're in an office and then someone wants to come in and do a daycare. This is a real world example. Our engineering department gave them like a quote for like $50,000 of just changing the use of that building. So now that I've been here, I've finally gotten and both Chris and Luis probably have been familiar with these sort of giant bills that come in. So kind of showing our council, we're starting to talk about it now. So no guarantees, but basically a daycare, for instance, is something that is beyond just an amenity, right? Daycare is at a crisis level in the low country. People can't afford it. And supply is part of it. So starting to look at things like that and possibly reducing those change of use for small businesses and amenities we identify. Um, and right now we don't have any grants back or anything like that to small businesses, but I hope to in the next 18 months sort of try to introduce like a facade grant that might kind of be able to help out businesses as they just try to slap a coat of paint on the outside or something like that. And of course, we have, if you go to mountpleasantmade.com, there is a kind of a small business portal that should be able to help you with everything you need to do to get open, including like, do I need an architect? Do I need a broker? Do I need this permit, that permit, and stuff like that? And then while that's sort of a static thing, it's pretty helpful. And I think folks would find a lot of help going there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Any resource is a great resource. I guess before we move into Q&A, I have a final question for all three of you. So I guess we'll keep the same kind of flow here, Luis, Chris, and Matt. Luis, what is the biggest mistake you see local businesses making when it comes to commercial spaces that you'd like to see them avoid?
I think, it's sometimes there might be the misunderstanding that doing it by yourself, it will save you money. But, you have to have your experts around you to avoid spending more money than you need to. I'm sure you can call some of the agents off their sign, but that agent represents a landlord, and you're negotiating with that agent. That agent doesn't represent your interests. They represent the interests of the landlord. So always good to have your own agent, guiding you through the process. Hiring the team that's essential to make the success of your space work. An architect, and talking to the town, talking to your bank, talking to an attorney as well. The leases that we use, there's standard leases that we use through the Realtor Association in South Carolina. Those are more easy to digest. I can probably explain them a little bit better. But a lot of these landlords, they have their own custom-made lease, can be 40 to 100 pages long sometimes. And a lot of it, if you don't have a legal counselor advising you, you may be signing to something that really will not be helpful down the road, right? So it's good to surround yourself with the people that can help you to avoid making those mistakes, and that will definitely increase your chances of making things work. And I'll be the first one to admit that's what we did. But I didn't know a commercial broker existed, and when we signed the lease, I thought with 6 months of free rent was great. We came in and we were ready to make the construction, start, and we found out that the slab where the space was going to be sitting on was a post-tension concrete slab, which means that it has cables that tension the slab together. And my wife is in the salon and spa business, and that relies a lot on plumbing. And our budget to install plumbing went from $4,000 to like $40,000 because of that. So, things that you don't know, like there's so much, I'll be the first one to admit that I learned new things in every single scenario. What Chris was saying, some municipalities will tell you that you can use a, grease interceptor under the three compartment sink, and some others will tell you that you have to put a grease trap in the ground in the middle of the street, and a grease trap in the middle of the street is going to cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars. And if you don't see that, and you sign a lease
Yeah.
and you back out, I'm sure the landlord's gonna say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I had all the people that were ready to go, and I went with you because you were ready." And it won't be easy. It can be very, very tricky. So again, surround yourself with the people that can help you to guide you in this process. It is a process, and with the support you can get there, and maximize your chance of making this successful.
Yeah, absolutely. Like kind of, to piggyback on what you just said, like it is cheaper for me to do it myself,
That's
but
right.
that doesn't mean down the road I'm going to spend more money on the mistakes I just made because I did it myself. So it's
Exactly.
better to get those guidance and surround yourself with experts that can help you, which the great thing about LLF and the program that we're doing
Mhm.
is we have experts we can connect you with that otherwise you would have to pay for, that are willing to volunteer and give their time to give you free advice, look over your lease, things of that nature that
Exactly.
you otherwise would have to pay for. So no,
In our area is very busy, like, so if you try to call some people, they will not even return a phone call. So it's good that you have this connection through, Lowcountry Local First, because
yeah, absolutely. I think it's because when you see LLF show up on your phone, you feel like you have to answer it. So I think it's a great thing for us. So,
that's right.
yeah, absolutely. What about you, Chris? What are
Oh
you?
man, y'all took all my thunder. That's what I
Uh,
was going to say. As Matt mentioned earlier, people, when you're starting a small business and you're wanting to get into a space, that is your baby, that is your dream, your passion, and don't undervalue and underestimate the complexity that it takes to get from point A to point B, right? From that dream to the time you open the door. And so having those people who have done this, done it before, know the pitfalls on your team is critical, I think. The last thing any of us want to see is an owner who thinks they can just do it themselves, go in there, try to do it, find out that they've done it wrong, they don't have the right stuff, have to undo it, lost time, lost money, got to get us involved. That's the worst time to do that, all that kind of correction, right? So get the experts on your side early and make that process as painless as possible.
What about you, Matt? What are you thinking over there?
The question is like the pitfalls or something there? Is that what we're asking there?
The biggest mistake that you see local businesses making when it comes to commercial spaces that you'd like to see them avoid that
Yeah, these guys covered it mostly. I will say know what's in that triple net lease, like what it really means, which is where having a broker comes in. I have seen people get hit with $100,000 bill because the landlord did a bunch of landscaping upgrades. Doesn't matter, it's in the lease, got to pay it. I have seen people that have hit their first summer and the HVAC gives out, and that's part of the triple net. Got to pay for it, or you walk and then you're in violation of your lease. Really know what that triple net means. And find a broker you trust who can feel out the landlord and can tell you honestly you want to get in a lease with this guy or not. Like that's important. And most property owners are good and they want their tenants to be happy, but you need a broker who's been around the block to help you out on that. And then just, you know, go to the Small Business Development Center or LLF or somebody and get them to help you write a business plan. Like, know where you're supposed to be in 5 years, get a step by step, and stick to it. Because yes, like like I said, like Chris said, it's your baby, it's your dream, but you've got to be a little dispassionate about this at some level because you still got to pay your light bill. So I think that's an important thing to do.
right? Absolutely. Like you think about like a Fortune 500 company, if they have to drop $100,000 on landscaping, it's like, whatever, like that kind of happened. But for a small business, these large sums of money that they get burned on could be make or break for them in terms of
Yeah.
launching their business. So I completely agree with you. Um, Well, I think a good time now is to hop into our Q&A. So I have a couple, 2, 3, 4 questions here. I got one in the chat here from Nadia, who's on the call. So whoever wants to chime in on this, maybe Chris. What is the ideal square footage for a new restaurant, and you as well, Matt, in the Mount Pleasant area? If
Oh
you're just
gosh.
getting started or you want to, launch your business, like what's manageable?
Square footage,
That's a great question. Go ahead, Matt.
you're saying what's the ideal square footage for a restaurant in Mount
Restaurant
Pleasant?
Mount Pleasant. I think like if without any context, maybe if you're first starting out, and you got a restaurant, you want to hop in there. Can you get away with 500 to 1,000 square feet? Do you need to hop into something bigger? Or maybe
Yeah.
start there and then move into something bigger when revenue's coming in.
That's a tough one, right? I mean, because I see restaurants downtown. I think a Little Miss Ha that was downtown. Like they used I mean, what I would call a closet, and it worked, right? But I've also seen very large restaurants, and if I had to offer, it's hard to say square footage wise, but I would offer the pitfall I see sometimes is that restaurants are too big for what they need. And then they tend to lose atmosphere because of it. And it just doesn't, then they're paying for space they're not using. I guess if I was in that realm of doing that, I would more go to grow as needed, but start with only what you need is my
Right,
opinion.
right. Because
Or
you can always
see, yeah.
expand. You can always get bigger. Like you look at 167 sushi bar. I'm not sure what the square footage
Mhm.
is. It's got to be, under, it's pretty small space, but it
Yep,
works. It's very
that's right.
intimate, very
Yep.
customer focused, very customer centric.
Right. And one thing I'll add, I forgot to say earlier, was when you're looking at a space, particularly on our locale, we're very blessed with nice weather, particularly right now. Outdoor seating is a big thing for restaurants. But what a lot of people don't realize is that outdoor seating counts against you from an occupancy when we're looking at codes and we're looking at bathroom counts and things like that. So it's not free in that regard. So just that's something to consider when you're thinking about space, not just conditioned space, but outdoor space.
And I would
Right.
add as well parking, because the more
Parking, yeah,
more parking you're gonna
yes,
have.
Right. Parking's a
yeah,
piece of it. But what I've understood is when you have a patio too, you have to have that boundary. It could be pots of plants, but there has to be a established boundary
for safety, yeah.
for safety and things like that.
Yep,
That are really
yep.
important. So Matt, kind of to ping over to you here, what resources does the town of Mount Pleasant provide to help find commercial space properties? So I know on Mount Pleasant Made, which big plug, you have a properties page where people can kind of get an idea of the atmosphere, if you will, of Mount Pleasant and what's available for them. Is that
Yeah, we do. It's essentially the LoopNet. We pay to have it embedded on our website, so you can go and see what commercial properties are available in Mount Pleasant, and it's just the Zillow of commercial properties. You can set your parameters and see what's on there. I'm always happy to give anybody like a list of 3 brokers I trust, right? If they want to, like, if they're getting serious about it. I go and look at properties all the time just so I kind of have like a feel for it. I'll just call a broker and just say like, hey, I want to know what this thing is about. So will you let me look around? They're always happy to do it, and I'm always happy to share that. LoopNet that kind of has another side to it called CoStar, which is just another property website with a lot more Big Brother capabilities that lets you kind of drill down into more information about some of these properties. And occasionally, because we're the town, I'll know some things that are off market that could be available if someone were to knock on the door at the right time, right? So we're definitely available to do that. And really help out where we can. I'm not a broker. I don't like pretend to be one, but I try to have my thumb on the pulse of the commercial environment in town.
right? Yeah. And not to put you on the spot, but just curious question. Do you see Mount Pleasant maybe looking in the future to reserve a certain portion and or percentage of the spaces that are available for local businesses. Kind of like
So-
being here was kind of maybe discussing like they would reserve a certain, percentage to really support local businesses in the area.
I think that is definitely possible in things that are like sort of a larger, like if someone comes to us and wants to do a plan development or amend their plan development agreement or whatever, that's when we can kind of try to work that in there. And so, yeah, that's something that has been talked about with folks that have come to us even recently. And when you're negotiating these things, it's so plan development is essentially a developer asking for their own set of zoning rules within a piece of property. And within those zoning rules, you can sort of ask for as a municipality all sort of different things. Like maybe you ask for something related to design standards, or if you're familiar with downtown Greenville, they have had like a artificial ice skating rink, in the past during Christmas time. And that space was negotiated by the city as a civic space when they were doing all that stuff. And you can go do things like amphitheater. All these things are negotiable. And I think as we grow and the square footage prices continue to climb, it will become more palatable to my council to stick that into things like development agreements. I also think that there could be, as we want to attract and retain more local businesses, we've kicked around the idea of having a leased space or buying a space that other cities have done things like you compete for it and you get this storefront for a year at like no to little cost. And that's been successful in Spartanburg and some other cities that are outside of South Carolina. But if we're up to Matt, we'd already be doing all this stuff. But frankly, it takes political will,
Yeah.
and elected leadership has got people from all walks of life in their ear, people who might care about this stuff, but there's people who are more concerned with stray dogs and kids on e-bikes than they are with anything else. And that's
Those
what
e-bikes are a big deal in Mount Pleasant.
and that's what my elected leadership has to address, because that's their job too. So yeah, I think there's a real chance to do that. I think that Mount Pleasant knows that it has to keep these local things in place or it's going to kind of like lose its soul, and so for sure we are looking at progressive things we can try to do.
Yeah, and I think it's super important because, Mount Pleasant, Daniel Island, those are huge real estate pieces on the board. And getting small businesses to be able to actually afford to be in those spaces and have their businesses there would be a great thing for the local community. I think final question, I know we're kind of a little bit over time here, and then I'm gonna do a little shameless plug for LLF upcoming events, but Chris,
Yeah.
how can first-time commercial tenants avoid overspending on unnecessary design features? So if they're just getting in the space, what should they just focus on at the end of the day to just operate and then make those changes maybe later, but just to be there in the space and not try and spend too much money?
Yeah, I guess I default back to what's code required, right? Like the minimum things you got to have. So toilets are going to be the thing that could trip you up or need, making sure they're accessible, ADA compatible. Your ceilings, making sure they're installed properly to meet seismic requirements. The thing that I also see that surprises a lot of retail and commercial tenants is the requirement to add drinking fountains. Code requires it unless you're very small, right? So there's few exceptions that you can get around that, and that's a cost that a lot of clients don't know is going to be there, and we got to anticipate that. So getting those in, but it really a lot of that comes down to what is your space you're trying to be. Finish work, things like that. You could always come back and do more trim and stuff later if you wanted to, but meeting those code requirements of egress lighting, your plumbing, that sort of thing. Those are your bare minimums that you got to do to get open. Yeah.
One second part of that question would be, I was doing a little bit of research. Is ADA a requirement across the board? There has to be some form, shape, form, or fashion of ADA.
Yes, if you're open to the public, you're basically you're meeting those requirements. It's in the code. And for most part, it's not hard. Any building built after 1990 is generally going to be meeting those requirements. For the most part, what surprises a lot of people is how large bathrooms have gotten because of that. Your entries to your doors, those are your big pieces of ADA as far as that's concerned. But most spaces, we don't run into a lot of, unless it's historic, that's a different animal. We don't run into a lot of challenges with that. Like I said, I think the biggest surprise is bathrooms and how much real estate that takes up in your space when you start adding new bathrooms. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Yeah. Well, that's great. I think we're at a good place to end here. Just